It'll be nice. But a great initiative, and it's nice that it's so well organized. Sometimes we do these things, but I think people don't put so much effort. In the past, I've seen, but really, really nice that you all organizing it so meticulously and so much thought is going in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Murtaza, for those kind words. We are trying to trying to organize it in the best way possible, and we are again, since it's multiple international organizations involved, we are trying to be as professional and as organized as possible. So before they actually attend the main conference, I think it's quite important that all the delegates, whoever delegates and interested participants, they know at least the core concepts and also what the experience of a disaster and disaster management would be like. So I think this would pave a path to actually to give an insight on what management is and what the real life experience and all would be.
Sure. Also, just to check, my PowerPoint, I'll try to upload I'll try to share screen in about 2 or 3 minutes, and just to see if my PowerPoint is behaving itself. If not, luckily I've shared it with you also.
Yeah, sure.
Or can you share my PowerPoint back with me? You made some changes on the PowerPoint. No, can you share that back?
Sana madam?
Yes, sure. I'll just, what do you want me to share it and the WhatsApp?
Whatever makes it easy for you, whatever is convenient for you.
Jovan, I think we can start. തുടങ്ങല്ലേ നമ്മള് സന? I'm ready.
എല്ലാവരും റെഡിയാണോ? ജോബിൻ സർ,
Participants currently is 8.
Murtaza sir and
Murtaza, I think we will start our session. I think it's 7. We will try to add in all people.
Okay, it's already 6:57. It's already 6:57. We started sharp 7.
Yeah, you start adding people. Start sharp 7 this time.
I think Jitu sir, you can start sharing your screen. Make it on the first slide, and then we will start logging in everyone. And I think Sana madam will start the session.
Brief introduction, and we'll start. Anisha, shall I start adding people from the waiting room?
I think somebody else's screen is already here.
Yeah, that's Anish. Anish is supporting us for the technical.
Yeah, I think he has to unshare before Jiju sir can start sharing.
Okay, that's right.
Yes, Jiju sir, you can try now.
So can we start admitting people so
Yes.
that we can start sharp at 7 p.m.
I think we can start admitting people now.
Yes, sir.
We'll start off with the introduction.
Sana, you're now seeing my.
Yes, sir. We can see your.
Yeah, we can see your slides. Yes.
Sir, if you can share in the read mode.
What mode?
If you can share the PPT in read mode, it would be better.
Read mode. How can we do it? How can we do it?
More lana.
Exit.
Sir, exit.
Sorry, current mode and exit. Sorry, I have to escape.
Yeah. Stop share.
PT.
add ചെയ്തോ.
എങ്ങനെ
നിക്ക്.
സർ PPT താഴെ ഒരു റീഡിംഗ് ബുക്ക് പോലത്തെ റൈറ്റ് സൈഡിൽ താഴെ ഒരു ബുക്ക് പോലത്തെ ഒരു ഐക്കൺ കണ്ടോ? ഓപ്പൺ ബുക്ക്.
PPT ഇല്ല, ഒരു മിനിറ്റ് PPT
താഴെ റൈറ്റ് സൈഡിൽ ഓപ്പൺ ബുക്ക്.
എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു
സർ പറ്റുന്നില്ലേ നമുക്കൊരു കാര്യം ചെയ്യാം. ഇതിൽ തന്നെ കണ്ടിന്യൂ.
I think the old one തന്നെ മതി. Old one തന്നെ ഷെയർ ചെയ്യാം. അത് കുഴപ്പമില്ല.
ഇപ്പൊ ഇരിക്കുന്നത്.
I think we'll start, Sana madam. I think it's 7 now.
Yes.
ഷെയർ ചെയ്തോ സർ.
Yeah, we'll start.
ആ സർ സർ ഷെയർ ചെയ്താൽ നമ്മൾ ആഡ് ചെയ്ത് തുടങ്ങാം. കേട്ടോ.
ഓക്കെ ആണോ? ഓക്കെ,
ഫുൾ സ്ക്രീൻ ആക്കാം സർ. ആ താഴത്തെ
അതിന്റെ തൊട്ടിപ്പുറത്തെയാണ് റീഡിംഗ്.
ഒരു മിനിറ്റ്, അത് കിട്ടിയിരുന്നു ഇപ്പോൾ.
അതിന്റെ തൊട്ട് ലെഫ്റ്റ് സൈഡിൽ.
ഓക്കെ, ഇതാണ്. യെസ്, ഇപ്പൊ കിട്ടിയോ?
യെസ് സർ.
Okay, I think we'll start.
ആഡ് ചെയ്ത് തുടങ്ങാം അല്ലേ? ആഡ് ചെയ്ത് തുടങ്ങട്ടെ.
യെസ്,
ആഡ് ചെയ്ത് തുടങ്ങാമോ അനീഷ്? ആഡ് ചെയ്തു. ഞാൻ നല്ല ഓഡിബിൾ അല്ലേ?
യെസ്,
Yes,
ഓൾറെഡി
പിന്നെ തുടങ്ങിക്കാം.
ആഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നേ ഉള്ളൂ സർ. എല്ലാവരും
ആ
ആഡ്
ശരി, ഓക്കെ ഓക്കെ ഓക്കെ.
Murtaza, we are starting right now. We are adding on people. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to open my video. Give me a minute.
So let's start. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, Sana.
Good evening, everyone. Welcoming you all to United 24 webinar series on disaster management. I'm your host, Dr. Sana Samad, Emergency Medicine Consultant in Believers Church Medical College Hospital, Tiruvalla. Today, we have an exciting lineup of expert speakers who will be sharing their valuable insights on disaster management. Before we begin, I would like to thank our panel of speakers and dear participants for joining us. I would also like to thank the organizing committee of United 24 for this opportunity. In the next 1 hour, we'll be taking you through exciting sessions, including the disaster basics, the disaster definition, dynamics, and pre-disaster paradigm by Dr. Jeffrey Jacob, introduction to United 24 by Dr. Jiju Joseph, nuclear and radiological disasters, traumatic and explosive events by Dr. Jobin James, and the MSF experience in Iraq by Dr. Murtaza Ghia. So now let me invite our speaker for the very first session of this webinar. He is the CEO of Believers Church Medical Center, Koni. He is also the head of IP services and associate MS of BCMCH Tiruvalla. He was also the team leader of Team 37, which was sent for the disaster rescue mission in Wayanad. So let me welcome Dr. Jiju Joseph to take an introduction to United 24. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sana, for that beautiful introduction, and good evening all. I think we can start now. So today, as the first session, I will be taking you around the mission which we had in the Wayanad, which you all know, I hope, the tragedy which we had in Wayanad, and I will give you a brief on our experience on Wayanad, and then I will give you a short introduction about the United 24, what we are planning to conduct the disaster conference. So Wayanad, the disaster struck on a night, and we got a call from the health minister to come forward with a team to help. So we started on our journey with, as you see, I think, Sana, you can mute all others. It's quite
Yes,
a
sir,
bit,
it's done.
yeah. So we started with, as you can see, the whole team of 37 from the Believers. It was well organized, which included the medic, the paramedics, the pharmacist, the operation executives, the entire team with drivers and mobile AC was arranged in very short duration of time. There you can see our a priest called Sijachan, who was the main responsible person for organizing the team really quickly. And the team started by evening. We arranged, because already we had a disaster, a disaster kit and a disaster preparedness ready in our hospital. But still we didn't knew the extent of the disaster, so we had to put in more materials along with that, and we started in 3 vehicles. And by early morning, we reached the disaster site. Why I showed up this, because we already have arranged our accommodation some places, but by the time we reached, almost all the places were in red zone. We found it hard to get the accommodation. So I will come to these places at a later place where you see the exotic palace, where we got a bit of time to take a refresh ourselves. Then we started the next early morning. We planned what we don't know what is expecting us. Our information from the health ministry and the Department of Health was to reach the CHC Mepadi. So see, this is the CHC Mepadi, and you can see this is very. I hope the video is clear for all. This is only from the glimpse, because if you can see, there are very few people who take the videos. So this is like, this was very shocking for us, because unlike other disasters, these people are waiting for the dead bodies to be identified. So that is a very unlike other disasters. Even though I have been a part of disaster voluntary group in Kadalundi trade disaster, which happened. There was a dereliction of the train on 22nd June 2001, while I was a student of MBBS, but I volunteered it. So it was when I thought it was one of the biggest disaster that we will ever encounter. In that, we had around, even though now the exact numbers are not known, maybe around 60 to 70 deaths and around 300 to 400 injured. So now in this also, I expected that when I came into CHC Mepadi, I was received by these people waiting around for the dead bodies, or we cannot even say dead bodies. It's part of the bodies of the near and dear one. Most of the bodies were unidentified, and body parts were brought into this in multiple ambulances. So this was the time when we took our goods which we bought in, and the whole team gathered together prepared for this. So the mission for us, very few people were called, as you can see. We were called we were the first group to enter the red zone, because no other medicals were allowed during that time from the red zone, because it was very dangerous. This was the bridge formed by the army in the first phase, and we walked through this narrow bridge, as you see. There's a very narrow bridge, and we walked into our mission area. So we were not sure what all to carry, but we carried a spine board along with us. As you can see, this was the mechanism, like we used the towel which we had to carry the spine board. So exactly our mission came into being, means we got to understand our mission, that if you can see, these are a group of tribals which got isolated during this time, and they were completely isolated from the rest of the world. The problem with this tribal group was that there are specific type of tribals who are nomads, and who don't like to interfere with normal people. So when the NDRF and the army tried to evacuate them, they just entered into the more dangerous zone, and our duty was to bring them back. And in between, we got the information that one of the person was injured and severely injured, and they went into another area where it is still more dangerous. So a group of forest officers and our team, along with you can see Dr. Santosh of MSF along with us. So we had to go there and picking up and come back. So this was a mission which was explained. So thing is that we cannot just go and communicate with them. Communicating with them was also very difficult. Convincing them was still more difficult. Around 37 tribes were stuck inside, and information was one severely injured. So from there, we had to see all this. We had to walk through the hostile climates, the situations, as you can see, these all inside the deep forest. These were the areas, almost 2 hills we had to walk down. And when we reached, we saw a victim who was almost lost its below knee, and we had to mobilize him. We used a spine board, and somehow we convinced them, because he was in severe pain. We convinced him, and we laid him on the spine board, tied him up, and the only option was to carry him. So which was not easy. So carrying him to work. So our nearest plan was, so Dr. Santosh was constantly on communication with the health minister, who thought that they would be able to give us an airlift. So somehow from the second mountain up, if you can see, we had to carry him, which was a very difficult task with completely raining. So we had to carry him to the first mountain top. Then we tried for the air rescue. So then we understood that because of this hostile climate and it was becoming dark, the air rescue was impossible. So the only option was either to bring him back to that shelter, wait for the next day to the help to arrive, but we were not sure that he will survive or not. So, and we were not sure how this wouldn't happen, because I suspected a severe sepsis, a severe infection on his leg, and he was in severe sepsis condition also. So then all of us, with the mindset together, we decided to carry him. So carry him was not easy. We had to carry him 2 mountains apart. That was around 8 kilometers. So walking through this terrain, we passed through the jungle through around 8 kilometers we walked. So at last, so walking was not easy. We were never prepared for this. So we didn't have much water facility. We didn't have food. So to cover this 8 kilometers, we took around 6 to 7 hours. That is one hour we were able to walk only 1 kilometer, because it was heavy and many things. So we were completely dry. We didn't have water. We didn't have food. So, and at last we got into the place where we found it was a tourist center. If you can see, there was a shop by the side, which was locked. Nobody, because all were evacuated during that time. We literally had to break open the lock and took some foods or snacks inside there. We got water from there. At last, we saw there's a Google Pay, and we paid the amount to them, and then we continued our journey to reach to our destination. So a lot of things was learned during this. Again, starting without knowing what to do and what is our mission, going to the mission without proper equipment, without proper dresses, without protective gears. The forest was full of leeches, snakes, many things. So lack of water, lack of facilities. Moreover, one main thing which I learned was a group of people. So in such disasters, like people like tribal people, or there are certain communities, we have to consider, even during the flood season, most of the time people stuck in the house, and many elderly people refused to come out of their houses because they thought that the floods will be over this night or the next night, and many were stuck inside the house that way. So convincing people, convincing the community, all the people may not be of the same mindset, and again this extreme difficulties at communication of the language barrier, the cultural barriers. These all were the things which we encountered during this. It took around half an hour to convince them at least to come with us, and you're safe to come with us. These all things required a lot of effort, and as I told, like many lessons learned during this, and again the teamwork, the mindset. If one or two people in our group decided that if they said, doctor, we cannot do this, we cannot carry this person for another 8 kilometers, it would not have been possible. So the whole group, with the same mindset, we decided to take this, and we were able to take the person to safety. So this is one of the incident which I have to share about the Wayanad incident. And again, coming up, so if you can see in the photo, these are not the very few medicos and a lot of civilian first responders. So we saw the civilian first responders who did a wonderful job in this. It was a real appreciation to all those people who have never got any training, entered and jumped into situations like this on a humanitarian basis. So coming up with this one again, there was small, we had a lot of our groups, other segment of the groups were divided into smaller groups and went into houses, nearby houses, where in which the people who were affected were carried out, and they went over there. And this was another task which was given to us of setting up a medical aid. So when you look at the CHC Mapadi, the incident happened at a place called Churalmala. So this Churalmala, from Churalmala to CHC Mapadi, it's a journey of around 45 minutes uphill. So any help has to reach Churalmala, CHC Mapadi. So and the initial phase was very dangerous to set up a medical center anywhere nearby. But after 2 days of that, we set up a medical camp in a mosque with very, very few facilities available. So you can see that we took a table, bench and all. We set it up, the medical camp. Again, there were very few people who we were able to rescue in that, because most of them were died. We around 350, according to government statistics, around 2,000 to 3,000 people were staying over there, and in that we expected, or from the bodies which we got, was around 350 or 400. We actually, till now, it's not very clear how many have lost their life. So still there are bodies stuck inside big stones. I'm not bringing in that photos inside. So there were lots of incidents which are very difficult to explain on this. So in brief, so this was the team, and there were one thing which I actually deliberately didn't want to involve, was that we had many of the internship students who really want to come in, but whether to take them into this risky area. These all were some of the questions which I had in my mind, and I decided only few of us to go there in the red zone. So this team came back. So now coming up into a brief introduction of the United 24 conference. So every disaster is different. Every disaster, we have many things to learn. There are different types of unexpected things coming up in all disaster. So thinking all this in mind, and as we all are one of the other times that Kerala has a lot of disaster for the past 10 to 15 years or 20 years, we have been facing multiple disasters. Many things which we found difficult was that every time the first responders were the civilians, and most of the civilians were untrained. And even though small campaigns were arranged to train the civilians, it was very limited that we were able to do. And the civilians were not aware of the government, what government is planning for, and what government's plan of disaster is, what the NGOs are doing in that, what the volunteers are doing in that. So these all groups work together for a common goal, but lack of coordination was very evident in many places. So to bring in the government, district authorities, the charitable organization, the voluntary groups, and the collaboration with the international aids was one of the thought which was there in our mind for long. Considering all these things, we decided to have a global platform in which all these groups could come together, not only clinical, but also non-clinical, the civilians. Every group should come together at a common platform to discuss, to make decisions for the future. So according to some of the studies, in next 20 years, most of the Kerala will be affected by many such disasters and we will lose many lives. So before that, a global platform for such things to discuss and plan for the disaster, for enhancing global resilience and preparedness was found to be necessary. And with that intention, we had detailed discussions with many national and international groups. And with their help, so to say some examples, Johns Hopkins. So with them, we were able to bring in the HELP program, which is one of the best disaster management program in the world, which is the health emergencies in large populations. Winston University, George Washington University, NIMHANS, CMC Vellore, National Disaster Management Authority, NDRF, the Fire, Police, Disaster Administration, District Administration, Revenue Department, and along with the civilians are brought together in this disaster conference, which will be held on 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th of November. One main highlight which I want to say is that if we have to go and do this health program in US, it costs around 2 lakhs to 2.5 lakhs. But here we are doing it at a very cheaper rate. And it's not the rate or the break even of the conference. It's again, this 2024 meeting will not be sufficient. So our plan is to make it 2025, United 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, if all goes well, all the team will unite together. And I hope in the next 5 years, we'll be able to have a very big group who discuss seriously on this resilience and the preparedness of disaster in Kerala. So with that, I wind up my talk. It's already 10 minutes more over my time. Any questions or discussion? You're open.
Thank you, Jisoo, for that wonderful session. Dear participants, any questions? If there are no questions, we'll move on to the next session. The next session is about disaster definition, dynamics, and pre-disaster paradigm. Let me introduce the next speaker. This speaker is a specialist registrar at NHS UK. He is also an advanced disaster life support instructor and a dear friend, Dr. Jeffy Jacob. Over to you.
Hi everyone, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, hi. Good evening, most dearest participants. My name is Dr. Jeffy Jacob. I used to be working as a consultant in emergency medicine at Believers Church Medical College Hospital. Right now, I'm working as a specialist registrar in accident and emergency at UK, London, Northwest University Hospital. Thank you, Jesus sir, for that wonderful introduction to United. I am really very happy and proud to be a part of United. So, my topic for the day is to take you through the definition and dynamics of disasters and to brief you all on pre-disaster paradigm. So the next 15 minutes I'll be utilizing for that. Dr. Jiju Joseph has already given you a small hindsight on what disaster is. So the definition of disaster has been different throughout the different times of medicine. It has only been recently that emergency medicine or the medical specialty has started thinking of including disasters as a end specialty or a subspecialty to the medicine branch itself. So, what is the what is the definition of disasters? So, disasters is any event with its consequences that can cause a sudden and unexpected disruption to an individual, a community, or society, which results in widespread damage, losses, and impacts that exceed the community's ability to cope. So basically, if you take just that last line, the operational definition would be anything where the resources are not enough to meet the needs. Wherever the needs exceed the resources, it can be termed as a disaster. So when we were taught about the basics of disaster in Believers, one of our faculty made a quip where he said that on a Sunday, when you're sitting at home, relaxing with your family, and a group of your extended family comes over and you don't have enough food for them in the fridge and all the shops nearby are closed, then that itself is a disaster. So basically, it is wherever your needs are exceeding your resources, you're having a disaster. Now, what are disaster dynamics? Disaster dynamics, again, it has got a definition. See, all these definitions have been taken from different parts of the literature. These are not very organized or specific to one. There are no international definitions as such. There are different levels that are being followed. So what I could come across was disaster dynamics. It usually refers to the complex interactions between natural and social forces that result in disasters. So these interactions can occur at multiple scales, from the individual to the international and cosmic levels. So basically, that itself is just an understanding of the dynamics, is just an understanding of how disasters occur and evolve. And it involves many aspects. And these aspects are not common to all forms of disasters. So they primarily depend on the nature of disaster and the geography of the said disasters. That being said, Dr. Jiju had already mentioned in his talk that no two disasters are same. Even if it is, let us say, there are earthquake-prone areas in Southeast Asia, which are very, they have been dealing with this for such a long time. And one would think that it would be easy for them, or it would be comparatively foolproof for them to tackle such a disaster. But have you noticed the number of lives that are being lost and the extent to which the economy is being hit once a earthquake hits an area that has already been so much proficient in dealing with earthquakes? That is because no system is foolproof. So whatever system is being designed, it is in a way, it is designed to fail. No two disasters are same, and that is why another thing that Dr. Jiju had put forth was most of the first responders in India, what we see in India. So basically, my experience with disasters started in my 10th standard when I volunteered to work during the tsunami in 2005. And then I have been trying my best to be a part of the social network and dealing with disasters prior to my MBBS. And once I did my medicine, once I was in the government part of the government medical team, I was involved in a lot of disaster responses at various levels. The latest being the 2018 floods and the 2020 COVID-19 in India. And so most of my experiences from within Kerala. So like Dr. Jiju said, in Kerala, most of the response is being done by the layperson. Okay, so that is where the disaster dynamics and the need for having an organized or a structural approach to disasters is needed. So this is just one of the forms of dynamics of disaster that I had come across that I'm bringing to your attention. So once a disaster strikes, there are two levels of response. There's an individual response where you try to secure your safety and provide first aid and secure supplies for to yourself and to the ones around you. Then there's a response and relief by the community, focusing on immediate intervention like search and rescue, security, food, water, shelter, taking care of sanitation, medical trauma care, and all. Once the short-term response has been taken care of, see, it's not like the short-term response stops here and then the long-term response starts. No, each step in disaster is overlaps. So following the short-term response, we have the rehabilitation, where it is a part of resilience, where the restoration of basic services and functions are taken into account. Then there is a reconstruction, where we try to get to full reception of services plus preventive measures, which can take up to years, depending on the extent of disaster that is stricken. Following that, we have mitigation. Mitigation is the step where we try to assess the risk that was involved and try to understand what all is needed in preventing another disaster or trying to build up our resilience to the next sort of disaster that might hit us. Following which we have preparedness. This goes on until the next disaster strikes and the cycle starts back again. Okay. So this slide basically just puts forth before you what all are involved in disaster management. So what is pre-disaster paradigm? So my topic, as I had told earlier, focuses on pre-disaster paradigm as well. Pre-disaster paradigm is another structured approach to dealing with disaster dynamics. So this has been brought up as a tool to try to remember and focus on the different steps of disaster dynamics. So it starts from, there is PRE, which stands for PRE. P stands for planning and practice, R for resilience, E for education and training. Similarly, you have disaster. So initially, it was just the disaster paradigm. And then having realized sorry about that, having realized the amount of time that one needs to spend in order to plan for these things, the pre part of the paradigm was brought into it. So what all do you plan for this thing? So this is not, this lecture is not an exclusive content of what pre-disaster paradigm is about. I'm just trying to give you an outlook of what it is. So in planning, again, it depends on the nature and the geography of the area that you're teaching it. So there is no point of teaching about tsunamis to a landlocked region which is not at all bounded by any ocean or water body. They are not at any risk of having a tsunami at them. Similarly, so basically, it depends upon the topography and the geography of the area that you are. So you have to identify what are the at-risk population, identify the stakeholders who all are going to be a part of planning and execution of these things, whether it is at the government level, whether it is the non-government officials, how much of a participation can public take place, and what is the role of internationally deemed stakeholders like the MSF, the Israel Defense, or the Help by Johns Hopkins, and all those things. Then develop a valid plan according to that, which is again not going to be foolproof, but we definitely try to make it as foolproof as possible. And once the plan is in place, then we focus our majority of the time on training and education, exercise and drills. The more, the better, and then plan a review on that. So this is just for the health care system people who are in there. So what does planning and practice do with what has it got to do with the healthcare system? So that is where the two terms, surge capacity and surge capability, comes in. So surge capacity basically is how do you, surge means what is excess. Like for example, you have a capacity to do something, and if you're overrunning, how do you manage it? So that is what surge capacity takes care of. And surge capability. So where do you place the patient? The physical space where you're going to space the patient's a surge capacity. And how you're going to take care of them, how you're going to deal with the extra people, that is the surge capability. So surge capability basically focuses on the manpower and other logistics that you have with them. So this is just for the health system. So this comes in the treatment and triage part of the disaster paradigm. So plans again must have follow legal and ethical principles. Most of the time, the ethical principles are the that are usually put at test because many of the responders might not be from the local areas and might not be well aware with the local practices. So ethics is something that has to be really thought about. Then we should be guided by acceptable scientific and medical practices, because as long as we do not have, it is difficult to have a hard and fast black and white thing for each area, for each disaster. So we go by acceptable things that are available, that are being taught to us. And then we have the plans must definitely aid decision making as well. So what is resilience? So that we took care of the planning part. Now R is for resilience. Resilience is just the ability of individuals and the communities to adapt and overcome adversity due to disaster. That is, it is just a process by which the community tries to get back to as much close to the normalcy that they were in before the disaster struck. Then we have education and training, which is really essential to the workforce and community. Education training has definitely is to be competency based. It has to be standardized because, like Dr. Jiju reminded, most of the people who come into it are not trained personals or not disaster trained personnel. Even these days, when you have a lot of disaster trained people coming in, they are not enough to execute the entirety of the work that is being taken over there. So you definitely end up putting in charge many civilians who have no too little amount of training. That is why you need standardized training measures which can be taught to civilians in a very short period of time and which can be executed in a well-mannered format. And then you have to definitely set performance expectations. So that takes care of the pre of the disaster paradigm. Now the disaster paradigm, which has been in place for some time, starts with detection. Detection is you have to detect whether the disaster has actually taken place. So is a disaster actually present? So what has happened? What is needed now, and whom should I call? So that takes part of the detection, which is the smallest phase of the entire pre-disaster paradigm, is the detection. So once you are sure a disaster is in place, then the disaster paradigm has to be set in motion, which starts with incident management. So and this is just a screen which I put where which showcases how it is incident is managed. So you will have a incident management cell usually at the site of the disaster and one away from the site of the disaster as well. And it depends on what level the disaster has taken. If it's a state level disaster, it will be in the state revenue headquarters. If it's a district level disaster, it will be in the district revenue headquarters. And if it's a local disaster, it will be in a safe place, which is out of the red and the hot and warm zones. In the cold zone would be the incident management where it will be taken. One important thing that has to be paid close attention is the communication aspect, where information sharing has to be very effective. It has to be timely and accurate. I would like to repeat that again. All information shared has to be timely and accurate. And what Kerala has been practicing for the last 5 years. So what Kerala has been practicing for the last 5 years is having one voice and one message. So which is a very good model for all the disaster planning activities. Then we come to S, which stands for safety and security. Safety and security, basically, this is the way that things are prioritized. First is definitely self and the team. We should ensure that the area that we are going into is safe for us and the team to go into. Second priority would be the uninjured public, to bring them out of harm's way. Third, then we take care of the casualties. How to triage the casualties, I'm coming to that. And fourth, we have to make sure further damage to the environment is not in place. After safety, we look at, we assess the hazards. We have to recognize the likely causes of safety and security concerns. For example, if a building has collapsed and you're going near the building, then you have to try to identify if there are further chances of the getting collapsed further, or there is any other potential dangers hazards nearby it. And you have to assess the risk of causing additional casualties. Next, you have to look at the support. What support basically means the logistics. It is the logistics and disaster response. What do I have? And what is needed? Definitely, what do I have will be much lesser than what is needed, because that is the definition of disaster. If you need 50 ambulances to take 50 people at the same time from the site of disaster to the hospital, you will have one ambulance, and you will have to triage who goes first in that ambulance. So where is the support? So in that example, the hospital that the patients are being taken to, where is it located? When will the remaining support arrive? And what if it does not arrive in time, or what if it does not arrive at all? All those are the questions that support looks at. Then comes the triage and treatment, which is the first step, kind of where medical faculty is completely involved in. Completely, I would say completely involved in. So disaster triage definitely works with a large number of casualties. It has to be very much ethical. It has to be easily performed, because most of the time, like I told, you would not have enough people medically trained to go and do a proper triage over there. So there has to be a system that is developed that makes it easy for the layperson to understand and learn the triage system and support the medical people in triaging the persons. Definitely the priority is both the treatment and transport. You have to treat the emergency what all you can over there at the site and transport them in the order of priority to the nearest health facility. And it has to be standardized. So there are a lot of things that has come up. For example, so I'm just taking the 2 minutes to go over it. For example, there is a salt triage. And till when does the treatment continues? The treatment continues till all the casualties have been transported from scene or available resources have been exhausted. Then comes E, which is the penultimate step of the pre-disaster paradigm. E is basically evacuation. You have to relocate yourself, the team, the public, and those who have been affected, the casualties. You have to get them to a point of safety, and then you have to worry about how and when transport is available. And you have to also definitely look at relocating the people who are not directly involved now, but who are at a high chance of getting involved in the very near future. Then we have the recovery phase, which is the last step of this thing, which is usually the one that takes the longest time. It is the first step of the recovery phase would be the after action review, which starts as soon as possible. It is basically structured analysis of disaster response. So in the later years, in the recent years, the after action review is a very detailed one on which a lot of papers and researches are made possible. It is done to identify the gaps and weaknesses in the current response that we did. Recovery aims at relief and rehabilitation and restoration of the community back to where it was before the disaster struck. So this is what I try to take you all in the last 15 to 17 minutes. So this is what this is how we go about the disaster dynamics. I had seen a couple of people raising their hands, but I would leave that to the moderators for discussion, maybe towards the end of the session. Yeah. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Good day.
Thank you, Dr. Jiffy, for the informative session. The audience, any questions? So if we have no questions, we'll move on to the next session. So let me introduce our speaker for the next session. He is a distinguished expert in disaster management. He is also, he has worked in the world's most challenging situations. Through his illustrious career in Doctors Without Borders, he has been pivotal in establishing a temporary hospital setup in the war-torn town of Mosul. So let me welcome Dr. Murtaza, Senior Clinical Fellow, Critical Care and Echo, NHS UK. So over to you, sir.
Hello, good evening to you all. I'm just wondering why, for some reason, I'm unable to share my. I've shared my screen, but as you can see, it's empty. Just tell me if this is good.
Okay, can let me check, sir. Just a second.
Yeah. So meanwhile, just to tell you a bit of my background, I worked as an associate professor in emergency medicine in a medical school in Mumbai. For the last 1 or 2 years, I've been in UK trying out different things. Just like any other disaster, a person interested in disaster would be leave a zone of comfort and enter a zone of discomfort. So that's what I've done coming to UK. It's not entirely by coincidence that my backdrop is tremendously ordinary with one silly looking door behind me. I think it's symbolic for us in disaster management to sometimes think that we do disaster management because we want to help people. We can help people best if we can first help ourselves. So one of the rules which is seldom spoken when it comes to disaster management or emergency care is take care of patients, but take care of yourselves first. So in my room now, for example, if something goes wrong, which could also mean my wife sitting here and getting upset with me, I've got the door, I can just run outside. So I am taking care of everything, but I'm taking care of myself first. Because that's the best way to serve people, serve yourself. Nothing selfish in that at all. Having said that, I'm just wondering if there's a way to get me to share my screen. I'd like this to be fun and informal, which means people can drop in not just questions, but just thoughts, comments, smileys, whatever they are called. So any of those emojis are okay with me. It just motivates me to keep the session as informal as possible. Now, we are sharing a screen, but
Yes, sir.
but not the PowerPoint for some reason.
So can you stop sharing the screen now?
Oh, sorry, apologies. Thank you. So I've already got a thumbs up. Motivated now. So quickly, I want to waste organizers' time because they've been so particular about being punctual and sticking to time limit. I just want to bring in a new understanding of disaster management. The reason I do this is because when we go as responders, we need to be aware of why we are doing this kind of work. Usually, and almost always, let me just say, it's because we want to help. But there are various undertones of why we do this kind of work. My understanding, and this is when I was asked, why do you want to do something like this? You're sitting pretty as an associate professor in a medical college. Why would you want to go on and pick up an unnecessary challenge to your own existence? I obviously felt a bit like a hero, but in my head, I knew I was doing it for multiple reasons. The multiple reasons I'd like to share by the virtue of a poem. I wrote this about why I went to Iraq, and it's not entirely a selfless decision. As you can see, I told about taking care of myself, which is part of what we do with Code Blue Holistic Wellness Solutions. It's like a small startup in India that's helping healthcare professionals take care of themselves for their own wellness. Next slide, please. Oh, I think I can change the slide myself. Superb. So just to remember, I've taken due consent from all people involved. Next slide, please. These views are my own and they do not belong completely to Doctors Without Borders, which is obviously an international organization. So we have these contents here. Main purpose will be today to discuss on content number 1, which is the purpose of humanitarian medicine. If there is time, we'll discuss 3 challenging cases. I'll skip that and discuss the Iraq situation, which may be a bit more interesting for people. And the fun part may be the cultural challenges, or rather, I would say the thrill of working in a multicultural team. So let me, next slide, please. So the first steps was obviously for me, why am I doing this? Next slide, please. Yeah, so the main purpose, next slide. Yeah, next slide, please. So I'll go on in terms of this poem. It's called The Partial Truth. So maybe it's a travel bug that makes us tipsy, and we can justify it by being a humanist gypsy. I'm wondering if there's a way I can share so I can control this a bit better. For some reason, this is a bit difficult for me. Just one moment. I'll just try sharing my screen again.
Okay.
Meanwhile, I think for this technical glitch, I apologize. I'm wondering if anybody wants to share a quick thought on the chat.
We'll do one thing. If it's taking time, we can, if you want to take some time, we'll go to the next speaker and come back.
So I've got the Explorer on. Sorry. Is my screen now visible with my PowerPoint?
No, sir.
Okay, so what I'll do is, sharing my screen, and I've opened. Okay, is this visible now?
Yes, sir. That's visible.
Okay.
It's visible, sir.
Yeah, so I think this is a good example of disaster. This was a technological disaster on my part, but then the keys are how we recover from it. Disasters are inevitable. So the big question was, why did I want to do this? And I told myself, maybe it's just a travel bug that makes us tipsy. We enjoy it, and we can justify it by being a humanist gypsy. Maybe it's the ER, the promises it could belie, and we go in its pursuit for the adrenaline high. And that was something that I tell myself, that it's not entirely selfless. I did it because I enjoy it. I did it because I think it's thrill. I get to see a new culture and things like that. Now, the first step was the hardest to joining Doctors Without Borders. The first step was hardest simply because it required a lengthy application process. This was a 6-page application, multiple emails and interviews later. I was finally
off to Iraq. Of course, more and more paperwork. As you can see, I was going to Iraq, Mosul, where the Battle of Mosul was fought by ISIS and the combined forces of what they call the Shia militias, the Iraqi government, the Kurdish forces, everybody combined against the ISIS in Mosul, and that is called the Battle of Mosul. But as you can see, the visa, so to speak, that I have here has nothing to do with Iraq indirectly. It's the Kurdish region. And the reason is I actually had to apply for 3 different types of visas. I would call it inverted commas visas, because the geopolitics was so confusing that you can't enter one area if you don't have the adequate clearances from the other regions. So I had 3 visas, and that's how I finally landed in Baghdad. And you can see this. So here, I'm going to see if at least my pen starts working. So can you see the green spots that I'm making here? I'm making a green heart.
Yes, we can see.
Oh, you can. Okay, the heart didn't come through, but okay. So Mosul is here. Yeah. And I landed in Baghdad. The reason was simple. It's because Baghdad was where the starting point was. From here, we got all the visa work done. But before Baghdad, they put me in Erbil because they wanted me some safety clearance from here. Now, from Erbil, you would think that I can just travel to Mosul, but instead they sent me all the way down here. The reason was this region was not safe for travel. So I came here and then traveled all the way up. And in this process, I got some security clearances done for myself. Moving on then to the next slide. The slide has stopped working for some reason. Okay. Showing you West Mosul now. This is what West Mosul looks like. The time I went there, just after the Battle of Mosul, to be honest. So this is what West Mosul looked like. And you can see here that the entire bridge was collapsed. And this is where I want to ask a very interesting question to everybody. And think, there were apparently 6 or 7 bridges that connected West and East Mosul. And 6 of them were destroyed. And when the car was taking me on the 7th not destroyed bridge, I asked them, my God, ISIS is horrible. They destroyed 6 bridges. And my driver told me, no, it's the army that destroyed the bridges. And I was completely shocked. Why would the army of a country destroy its own bridges? Does anyone want to guess why somebody would do that? Why would the country, the army destroy? Anybody?
To keep them contained in that region.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting to contain. So ISIS was like a virus, let's say, and it was largely coming from West Mosul, and they could travel to East Mosul via these bridges. So just to contain them, the army themselves destroyed the bridges, so ISIS doesn't move. Fantastic, so superb. These are some of the other images. As you can see, widespread destruction. This was a small stadium that they were planning to build, completely destroyed by the ISIS. These are the housing areas. Simple areas, even which are not directly affected by the main battle. You can see there are just bullet marks on every single wall. It's pretty disappointing when I had to go through all of this to reach my hospital. My hospital, of course, was a makeshift hospital. It wasn't really a hospital. It was a steel tent that was made by the MSF team. Now, because this is a medical conference, just to tell you the limitations that we deal with. Normally, we know that this is a standard prescription for asthma exacerbation. And what we like is when we use an inhaler, we always use a sort of a device that extends the ability of the inhaler. And that device is called? Anybody? Spacer. Yeah, a spacer can cost so much money. Let's say in India, for example, it can cost $400-500. So we couldn't, MSF didn't have that kind of funds. So we created our own spacer. I remember the nurses going to the bins, picking up saline bottles, which were used, cutting them in the shape of the nose, and we made our own spacer. And as you can see, we didn't have any nebulizers in our hospital, in our emergency department. Thankfully, there's enough evidence to say the nebulizer actually has no greater benefit than a spacer. Similarly, we had this case, typical, we had a lot of injuries which were happening, some related to the war directly, some routine injuries which were neglected because the government hospitals were shut down. Now, normally we are comfortable using things like propofol, fentanyl, all of that, but they had nothing because these were slightly more expensive than the good old cheap ketamine. So all we did was use ketamine for everybody, all age groups, because it's either this or nothing for procedural sedation and sometimes analgesia. I want to move on to one of the more interesting segments, which is the team. So as you can see, my team, so I was one of the A&E consultants. The second A&E consultant with me was on the left here. She's a Canadian consultant and wearing that scarf only because the local situation demanded us to adapt to what we may believe or may not believe in. And towards the extreme left is our translator, because it was largely Arabic that the patients spoke. Again, if you see here, this was our steel tent. That was myself when I was a bit younger and probably less shabby, with again, two of them instructing on what we are going to do if the next wave of disaster strikes us. Fantastic local Iraqi doctors, extremely brilliant. The man on the right is the university topper in dermatology. And the man on the left is a consultant in orthopedics. Yet we all were part of the A&E team. They were willing to work as junior doctors. And just simple examples of the unity the country had. The dermatologist, board certified dermatologist, he'll manage an SVT without telling me because he thinks that's just a basic case. There's nothing to inform the consultant about it. And the man on the left, the orthopedic consultant, he'll manage neonatal sepsis. And he won't tell me because he thinks that's too routine. It's not complex enough to involve me. So these were just examples of how in adversity, a community brought in a fantastic spirit. I've got 5 more minutes only. So I'm going to end this now with some more fun stuff. A team here of fun people. I was sent for 2 weeks to cover the Syria border because they had no doctors for 2 weeks. So I was sent there for 2 weeks and I met these fantastic people who could do funny things. Who would say this country is going through war? Just to cheer the kids up in the emergency department, some of the doctors were able to do fun things like that. Of course, wellness has always been an interest for me. I try to bring in some yoga every morning in the emergency department. So here, all of us practicing the Surya Namaskar. The fun part, of course, the guest house. We had food cooked by a local Iraqi chef, but on Fridays, they didn't come. So we had to make our own food. As you can see, I've got a British pediatrician, I've got an Australian midwife and a Canadian emergency consultant with me. All of us cooking different things and sharing food. If you're wondering who made that yellow dal, it was not me. It was the British pediatrician who wanted to challenge her dal making skills against mine. So that was hers. That is the Canadian nurse who was trying to threaten to kill me because I was constantly making fun of Canadians. This is the Japanese architect who actually built our temporary steel container. And as a parting gift after my 3 months in Iraq, he gave me some Kit Kat, which was matcha flavored. And they used to call me Sheikh Mortada. And they gifted me, the man in white is me. They gifted me as a thank you gift, the local Iraqi clothes. And we all had a nice party in our garden. This was on the last day. The reason why we could even celebrate was because our location was the governor's house. We were staying in the governor's house. And if you're wondering why the governor was so welcoming for all of us, people coming from different parts of the world, he was not. The governor just ran as soon as the ISIS attacked. His house was just vacant. So as part of the MSF deal with the Iraqi government, they gave us the governor's house. So it is a bit more safe, our house. And that's why we could actually have this kind of a funny party on the last working day. So thank you very much once again. I want to thank MSF, fantastic organization. Amongst many international organizations, they tend to have one of the highest ratings, not in terms of the salaries they give us, but in terms of the depth of work they actually do versus some of the other bigger names that you may have heard of, who do the talking, but will not do the walking. I want to thank you all for your patient listening. Apologies for some of the technical glitches on my end. I want to thank Believers Church Medical Colleges, the entire team. They've been very meticulous in their organization, specifically Dr. Jobin James, who insisted somehow to make this happen and try to make reasonable accommodations for me. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I'm happy to hear any thoughts, any comments, or if the organizers believe we should do that in the end, I'll leave it to that. Hopefully I finished on time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was an interesting session. Audience, if you have any comments or any questions, you can ask now.
Hi,
There are no
Muthu.
questions. Yes, please.
Myself, Rahul, from St. James. I just want to know, Muthu, whether you people were prepared for any disasters. You were being attacked, or any such preparation were done. Were there any plan B in a case suppose you had to face?
Wow, that's a fantastic question. So by the time I was there, so I spent 2 weeks only figuring out the visa process, security process. The Battle of Mosul was actually done. ISIS was formally defeated, but informally they were there in sleeper cells. So there were no direct attacks to us. There was just one explosion, which was again by the sleeper cells of ISIS. So from that perspective, nothing that I faced upfront, but a lot of security problems because there were a lot of landmines. So I was not allowed to walk anywhere on the road. The car takes you on only hospital, back home, hospital, that's all. For an eventuality, there were 2 types of protection. Our house had an underground sort of bomb protected safety room, which was a steel container inside our house. So at the moment it's activated, a code, all of us run to that place. That place has food, toiletries for 3 days and medicines for 3 days. So we can survive 3 days in that in case we were attacked until an international sort of help could come and save us from that place. I was also given a kidnap card just in case I was kidnapped for ransom by any local authorities. And my kidnap card had everything written in Arabic, that if this doctor is kidnapped, you want money, call this number. And that number first checks whether I'm alive. So there's a code which only I know, and one person sitting in Switzerland, which was the headquarters, knows. So if they ask the kidnapper, what's the code? And if I'm already dead, for example, the kidnapper can't answer that, then MSF won't even discuss how much how much ransom can be paid. But if they ask the question and I answer, then they check with Switzerland if that answer is correct. If it is correct, that means I'm alive. Only then they open discussion. So they have lots of security measures in place at an individual level, as a group level, tie-ups with the United Nations for a flight that can come and airlift us, our safety rooms and things like that. So if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, sir. So let's move on to our last session. This session is about nuclear and radiological disasters and traumatic and explosive events. Let me invite our speaker for this session. He is the Assistant Professor of Emergency Medicine in Believers Church Medical College Hospital, Tiruvalla. He's also an Advanced Disaster Life Support Instructor. Dr. Jobin James, over to you.
Good evening, one and all. Thank you for those warm words. So without any further ado, let us stick to time and we'll move on to our next presentation. So what we have heard from right now from Mortuza after the experience in MSF, I think it was all there over the news during that particular
audio is not so clear.
Hello, am I audible right now?
Much better.
Hello, am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So without any further delay, let's go jump straight to our topic. Now, our earlier speaker, Dr. Mortuza, talked about his experience in Iraq with MSF. So we all know what kind of injuries most of them are undergoing through. It is usually a traumatic and explosive events. So in this talk, we'll be trying to deal with 2 topics. That is one, nuclear and radiological emergencies, and the other one being traumatic and explosive events. Now, from the earlier session by Dr. Jeffy, he said in a definition, the main operational definition of a disaster. If you forget the big definition, remember the simple definition. A disaster is termed when the needs are greater than the resources. So when the needs of a particular place outweigh the resources, it becomes a disaster. And this is very much what was of extreme importance or more critically involved when there's a nuclear or a radiological disasters. I know we all are in different streams, and chemistry is not a strong subject for many of us. I mean, some of us like us, some like me do not. So before we go into nuclear and radiological disasters, it's important to understand what are some of the basic concepts. So over to a little bit of basic chemistry. So we know from these radiation basics that there are 4 types of particles released during any radiation. So there's alpha particles, beta particles, gamma, and neutrons. And these are the 4 ones that we will try to explain shortly. So alpha are the first type of particles which are released during any radiation, and these have an extremely short range. The more important point being that they cannot penetrate the outer layers of the skin. Whereas on the other hand, when you're talking about a beta wave, they have a little more range. So they are a bit harder to shield, but they can be shielded by means of an aluminum foil or something like that. But it causes some damage, and it travels only a short distance. Whereas whenever you're talking about, especially any nuclear or radiological disasters, the main waves that we are concerned about are basically gamma waves and the neutrons. So gamma waves, as you can see, they are very difficult to shield against and can penetrate very well into the tissue. And these gamma as well as neutrons, on the other hand, they penetrate well and they make those particles such as metal, soil, rock, all of them more radioactive, thereby emitting more beta and gamma radiation. So from these simple slides, you could have understand that beta, gamma, and neutrons, they penetrate the tissues to some extent in various degrees. And these can cause various kinds of DNA damage, cell death, and cause various effects to the body, such as radiation sickness and all those other things put together. So this is a summary of what we were trying to say. So alpha, beta, the X-rays, the gamma, and the neutrons. So you can see the penetration with the level of each waves. And the ones we are more concerned about is gamma and the neutrons, which are especially released during a nuclear and a radiological disaster. Now, what do you mean by a radiological disaster and a nuclear disaster? Both are completely different terms. So let's put that, that's the first thing to be put across. So when we're talking about a radiological disaster, it is where radiological activities are released into a particular area, but there may not be, or it is usually not associated with a nuclear explosion. The main purpose of a radiological event is basically in order to create fear, panic, and contaminate the area. Human injury might be there, but it is not necessary. Now, when I say this, it seems like, okay, I don't get a picture of what it is. So best example is, the best way to realize this is by, if you have watched several Hollywood movies, you know where I'm going along with this. You have heard about this term such as called as a dirty bomb. So what is basically a dirty bomb is something like, you have heard of a dynamite. So within the dynamite, they put inside radiological substances. This is called as a radiation dispersal device. So when this dynamite explodes, the radiological substances within it also gets released. They become into the radioactive form and they also get released. So there is effects of both of them put together. That is the effects of the explosion of the dynamite as well as the effects of the radiological component. So this is called as a dirty bomb. So what happens is, imagine there is a dirty bomb or a radiological emission device there and it has exploded. So from that dynamite, from the expulsion of these particles, anyone in close proximity will get injured and might even suffer serious injury. And because of the radiological substances in it, these gamma and the beta, gamma, and the neutrons can penetrate in the tissue, thereby causing radiological injuries. But as you can see, these are smaller detonation devices. So these are not like our nuclear disasters that we think of when we think of, say, Hiroshima or Nagasaki. So they may not cause that kind of a disaster, but these are very extremely effective in creating panic and to contaminate the area. So what would you do when you hear that there is such a radiological disaster? The first thing is to get inside and go to safety. As we said, radiological disasters are smaller scale disasters. So the penetration of the waves may not be, so our primary objective is to hide in the safest area possible and stay inside and stay tuned to the most reliable sources. They always say during a time of a disaster, listen to national telecast radio or national televisions. It is very important not to create more fear, more panic, and to prevent misinformation during such crisis. Whereas what about a nuclear event? When a nuclear event happens, that is what we think of when we say Hiroshima, Nagasaki, any nuclear explosion, where the main component is there is a massive explosion where there is a huge amount of radiological material that's being propelled out. So what happens is there is a shock wave, massive amount of radiation that goes around, and this can, because of this radiation, the radiation is a main component there, and that radiation itself can cause severe radiation sickness, thermal burns, and various other injuries. So if I'm trying to summarize it into it, we can say nuclear events involve a large scale of deaths and large scale of radiation exposure, whereas radiological events are much smaller. So this is the basic way of as to how I can differentiate between a nuclear disaster and a radiological disaster. So from this, you can understand whenever there is a nuclear explosion or even there can be trauma, there can be burns because of the thermal heat component, there can be burns, there can be radiation injuries, and there's something called as electromagnetic pulse. What is electromagnetic pulse? When there is a radiation explosion, what happens is there's a burst of electromagnetic waves that are released, and that can completely cut off your electromagnetic grid. Therefore, you might lose your Wi-Fi connection, your electricity, all those things are being cut off. This is called as an electromagnetic pulse. So what should you do whenever there is such an incident? It's very important to look at scene safety. As mentioned here, any disaster, ensure you are safe and everyone is safe. So ensure your safety first and look at security. And then it's very important to wear certain equipment such as personal protective equipments. So these will allow you to prevent the exposure of such radiation. And then radiation exposure monitoring and casualty decontamination. So when any such nuclear or radiological disaster happens, there's going to be a disaster team that is going to come to the area. And what are they going to do? They are going to see which is the area that's involved in the radiological disaster, and they will try to identify what kind of a radioactive substance is involved, because that can give an idea of what is the range of which it can go and how it can affect various human lives. So again, this is beyond the scope of our topic today, but this is what usually happens during a disaster setting. So when a nuclear event happened, as you all know, so lots of people are going to die at the center of that explosion, and around the peripheries, there's going to be a lot of mortalities and significant casualties, and they need to be managed actually quickly by means of a mass casualty triage, which we'll be discussing in another lecture. And another issue with all these radiological issues, whether it is nuclear or radiological, is going to be acute radiation syndrome, where because of these radiations, since they penetrate the tissue, there is going to be multi-system disorder where it can involve all the cells and it can undergo cell death. That is called as acute radiation syndrome. Now, what are the public health implications? As we all know, it can completely crumble the economy of a particular country and even its resources. So there is going to be emergency crisis. It can cause severe physical rehabilitations, as well as mental and behavioral considerations are to be considered. And at-risk population are the ones who are going to be most vulnerable in any disaster. Remember, in a situation of a disaster, the most vulnerable people are the old age people, the pregnant women, the women, and children. So they are the ones who are going to be more severely affected during any disaster. I'm pretty sure all of you must have heard of the Chernobyl disaster, and this is a classical example of a nuclear disaster. If any of you have, if any of you have not watched the series, please do watch it. It is there in Netflix and other series streams, and it is an excellent stream to actually teach you what are the effects of a nuclear disaster. The other topic we'll be dealing, which is somewhat close and similar to this, is a traumatic and an explosive events. Explosive events, what we usually mean by, say, for example, a nuclear event is a type of an explosive event, but when we are trying to talk here explosion, we mean a bomb attack. And India is not naive to it. We know that there are bomb explosions several places. Now we know there are places which are undergoing war, such as in Israel, Palestine, or Ukraine, Russia. So you can imagine the amount of explosive events that are happening in that particular community. So what do you mean by an explosion? So imagine there's a bomb and it explodes. So what happens? When there is an ignition or a spark, inside there's a rapid increase in the volume within the bomb, and it releases that energy. And that energy is being released at such a high temperature that there's going to be waves, and that is going to explosions. And there are different types of explosions. There can be supersonic and subsonic, depending on the speed in which these shock waves travel. So imagine this is a bomb. The bomb has burst. So what happens is there's ignition there. So that is called as the incendiary thermal effect. Because of that thermal effect, there is going to be a blast. And the first thing is that huge pressure is going to be released in the form of a blast pressure effect, or it is also called as a blast wave. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. Can you be a bit more louder?
Yeah. Sorry. So there is going to be an initial ignition, and this ignition, because of this ignition, there is going to be a blast, and there is going to be a blast wave. And this wave is going to spread rapidly. So what happens is this effect is called as a blast wave, and as the blast wave progresses, you can imagine that wave carries along fragments of the particles that are going along. So depending on where you are standing, you can have different kinds of injuries. So remember, in a blast injury or in an explosive event, there are three types of injury you have. There is something called as primary blast injury, which is basically injuries due to the blast wave. So when there is a bomb, the bomb has exploded, there's a blast wave because of the pressure. Because of that wave, whatever injuries you suffer, that is called as a primary blast wave. Now, because of that wave, there are going to be particles also which is going to go along with that pressure. Because of those particles, when you suffer injury, that is called as a secondary blast injury, which is due to the substances that are being propelled by the blast wave. And the last one is a tertiary wave. As the wave touches you, you are also being carried away by the wave and you will go and hit somewhere, maybe the car, a building. So the injuries you suffer after you get impacted on another object, that is called as a tertiary injury. So this is a real video. I hope you all have seen this happened 4 years back in Lebanon, in Beirut, where there were several tons of ammonium nitrate in the port of Beirut and it exploded. Now here you can see the intensity of a explosive event. If you can see here, somewhere there was the explosion. You can see the explosion there. Once the explosion happened, what you are seeing outside is called as a blast wave. And you can see as the blast wave is progressing, it is taking out all the particles, destructing every single piece. And those particles which are actually coming out from these buildings, those are the bullets or the propels. So you can see if someone is staying close to this blast, you are suffering first injury, a secondary blast wave because of the particles released from this. And because of this wave, you also get pushed and you suffer a tertiary injury. To see another impact of how these waves are clearly visible, this is another example. You can see the explosion, the blast wave, and the particles. You can see the cameraman went behind. That is because of the wave pushing you back. So what he suffered is a tertiary wave. You can see the particles also flowing towards him. So this is a good example to illustrate you, to show you the effects of a blast explosion. As you all know, several hundreds died. And after this single incident, imagine Lebanon suffered an economic crisis. They had this single event cost them loss of more than $15 to $20 billion, and they have been in economic crisis ever since. So to summarize the kind of blast injuries, you have the primary, the secondary, the tertiary. These are the three main kinds of injuries that you have from a blast. What are the quaternary? Quaternaries are the events or the injuries that happen after the disaster. So other explosions such as injuries, illnesses. So after you get these wounds, you get a superseded infection. So all those things can be, that is called as a quinary infection. Again, not to stress too much on it, but the more important points are our primary, secondary, and our tertiary injury. So whenever there is a disaster that strikes, whether it be a nuclear or a radiological disaster, as well as a traumatic and an explosive disaster, it is always important to approach any disaster in the form of a pre-disaster paradigm. I think Dr. Jeffy has summarized it quite well in a concise way. So again, so what do we mean by, how do we assess this in a pre-disaster paradigm? So the best way to example is, every government should know or should at least plan adequately well in order to prevent such attacks. Best example, when I gave the example of Lebanon, remember in the port there were ammonium nitrate, more than 2,000 tons of ammonium nitrate was in the port of Beirut. So they realized that this could have been avoided if those were actually segregated and put in a separate area. They were all put together. So that is why the PRE plays a very important role before the disaster strikes. A proper planning and practice, a proper planning of where things should be. Resilience is the ability of a community to overcome the disaster. So that is where the role of mock drills happen. So if a disaster happens, we should be able to know, okay, what should we do next? If we are not trained in it, it will be fully chaos and we'll be running left, right, and center. And the other one is proper education and training. This is where conferences, workshops, and our mock drills and all help. And this is what we are trying to teach you by means of our United course, where courses such as HELP and our mock drill, we are trying to educate and train what would happen and what is the outlook or what is an idea of a disaster and what should we do in the event of a disaster. How can we try to minimize the effects and how can we help to better treat and better deal with such a situation. And the rest is a disaster paradigm detection. This disaster paradigm happens once the disaster strikes, where there is going to be a detection and incident management, where the management will take over the function. Then you will have to look at safety and security, assessing the hazards, a proper support, triage and treatment, evacuation, and finally recovery. Remember, just like how Jiju sir started the topic with the Wayanad landslide, the disaster happened, but the recovery is still going on. The rehabilitation is still going on. It's an ongoing process. A disaster must have happened and it must have gone away, but the rehabilitation doesn't end there. So there's a lot of things to look forward to when you have such a disaster. So these are things that usually happens with an explosion, which again I'm not gone, which we all know that once you have a blast injury, you can have different types of injuries. And this is one thing that many people ignore. What about their cognitive? What about their emotional symptoms, behavioral symptoms? They undergo so much of post-traumatic stress disorder. So all those things are to be considered, especially in the setting of a disaster. Now, this is where people suffering from wars or landslide disasters and all those things, they require help. And that is what we'll be trying to focus for in the subsequent lectures and subsequent webinars, and also during our 4-day international conference, which is happening from November 14 to 17. So the floor is open for any doubts or any queries with regard to this topic or anything else. And the floor is open to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jobin sir, for the informative session. Dear audience, any questions? You can see a few questions in the chat box. Any questions?
Quinary injuries are basically injuries after, like imagine you have an injury and then you get infections from it. Example, you have an injury, say, for example, a semi-amputated limb, and the patient has come there, you have treated it, and then you get subsequent sepsis or secondary infection to it. Those are called as quinary injuries. That is one of the doubts there. And I think one of the doubts is for Dr. Murtaza. Sir, didn't you get fear to stay in such a conflict zone? So
Oh, sorry. Yes. So obviously, good question, because obviously there is fear. The question is, you have to balance out the fear with what you're gaining. At that point, if I made a list of what I was gaining, and I was gaining so many things in that mission, including some peace of mind, I was trying to figure out something in life, and I thought doing something like this will shake me and give me those deeper answers. I had had a breakup with my girlfriend that time, so I was very upset, very angry. I wanted to channelize that energy somewhere. So I think my need to do all of this thing superseded my fear. That doesn't mean that I'm some brave superhero or anything, because today, if you ask me to go again on a mission like this, maybe I won't, because now my fears are more because I've got certain other responsibilities. So the story has changed a bit. So I would say for each person at a different point in life, the fear versus what they are gaining, it's risk versus benefit, how we say, keeps changing. At that point, I was completely fearless and I thought I was gaining more. At this point, it's changed a bit. Having said that, when people ask me this, I was actually working in Mumbai. My medical school was on a highway, one of the most dangerous highways in Mumbai. And if people said, what if something happens to you in Iraq and there's an explosion and you die? I said, what if we are having this discussion on the phone, I'm crossing the road and on this highway I'm dead. So there's no end to what ifs. The chances were reasonable that I may actually die on this silly highway in Mumbai by talking on the phone. So I would rather prefer, if I were to die, at that point I said, I'd rather die this way than that. Usually, very rarely healthcare professionals are brutally attacked. Somehow the mechanisms are in place to take care of us, if that answers the question. Thank you very much for that question.
Thank you. If any other queries, please feel free to.
Thank you, sir. So let's wind up today's session. Before that, I would like to remind our audience, those who haven't registered yet, that United 24 is our first international disaster conference on disaster management. It's being held from November 14 to 17. We have exciting prizes for the quizzes and poster presentations. We also have the help certification for all the participants who are registering for the United. So thank you so much for your patient listening. So the next webinar is on 19th and 26th of October. We'll be sharing the details soon in the groups. So thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.